It's just occurred to me that even though I tend to talk a lot, I haven't really experimented with recording my thoughts in an audio file for my e-portfolio. And I thought it's something I'd like to try out a couple of times just to finish off my portfolio really for the assessments. So I'm going to tell you now about my experience of observing Craig from design as the peer observation that I had to carry out as part of the requirements for the PG CAP course. I was really looking forward to observing Craig because Craig was one of the first people that started talking to me at the start of the PG CAP course. We walked together a couple of times after the sessions and started to get to know each other, and I had the impression that he was a really nice guy, and I just thought that he probably would be a good teacher and certainly would be doing his best for his students, so I really did want to observe him. So I made sure that I booked myself onto a session with him fairly early on. I feel like I really learned a lot from going to visit Craig in his environment. It's very different from the building that I work in. The design of the building, and I don't know the reasons why it were designed that way, are probably very different to the thinking behind the building that I teach in, Maxwell. But it was interesting to see that even going into a completely different school, obviously I'm from a linguistics background and things can be a bit more technical and a bit more scientific and academic. It was really interesting to go in and see that even in a different school, they actually have problems as well with the layout of their rooms, and that maybe a problem we've got at our university is that the teaching rooms that we have as a legacy from earlier years are not suited to the kind of teaching techniques and discursive methods that we're told are the way forward now. In Craig's room, for example, it's a computer suite that's sort of had a screen put up as an afterthought so that you can do lecture-y type stuff in it. But actually half the screens are facing away from the board, and I did notice that students were actually craning their necks to look round, so that's not ideal. And also, even though Craig's course would rely heavily on the use of computers, half the computers were actually out of order, meaning that there was even less choice about where the students could sit. And furthermore, it seemed, as I observed the students, that they actually naturally wanted to work together in little twos and threes, because whether Craig realised it or not, what he wanted to do lent itself very well to problem-based learning, and the students naturally clustered and tried to help each other out with things. But the way the room was laid out, it wasn't really, friendly for spontaneous group work, and I realise he can't necessarily control that, but maybe he could have some influence on his timetabling next year and think about doing some sessions in a different room where they could all sit round in little clusters maybe. But anyway, I'm not really going to talk about the feedback that I gave Craig, because I think that's private between me and him, in the sense that if he wants to make that known, then obviously I'm happy for him to share what I told him. I just want to pass on some observations that I've made and what I felt. Certainly going into a classroom, you might feel a bit weird and that the students are going to look at you strangely or wonder who the heck you are. And that wasn't my experience. It was very relaxed. It was very informal. It was a pleasant environment, and I was welcomed and accepted by Craig and by his students as well. So I think, provided you are introduced properly as an observer, there's nothing for you to worry about on that score, and you can quite comfortably sit there and observe without any issues. I also realised that you don't actually have to observe for ages to be able to understand a bit about how somebody works and to learn things from them. I think I only stayed for about half an hour, and even then I filled a page of very tiny writing all the way up, and I was able to learn a lot. What was difficult for me though was actually giving the feedback. I really like Craig, and I really think he's a nice guy, and I also think he's an excellent teacher. So it was difficult to sit down with him and provide criticism, both good and some points for improvement. I find that difficult because I want to help and I want to be constructive, but I don't want to offend anybody. I hope I didn't offend, and I hope that what I said was useful and constructive in some way. but maybe this is something that I need to work on for myself, which is being able to give and receive constructive criticism and not worry too much about that process, and not worry too much about how that can affect personal relationships. And at the end of the day, if it's going to help improve our teaching, then I guess we shouldn't worry too much if a few feathers are occasionally ruffled. The benefits outweigh any disadvantages. So yeah, maybe that's a point for me to work on in my personal development, dealing with getting and receiving feedback. What I want to do just to round off here is to consider how the experience of observing a peer and providing feedback can help you to align yourself with the UK Professional Standards Framework for higher education. Within the areas of activity in the UK PSF, one of the things that we're supposed to think about, one of the areas for development, is to develop effective learning environments and approaches to student support and guidance. I can really see how improving yourself through observation can help with that. For example, if someone is just to come along and point out to you that your room is not ideal and help you think of some ways that you can get over that, surely you are actively trying to improve the experience that the student is having and develop that effective learning environment for them, and make sure that they have everything they need in that classroom, and also that things are set out in a way that's conducive to learning. So I can see how that ties in there. Regarding core knowledge, we're also supposed to know something about methods for evaluating the effectiveness of teaching. Well, certainly, I think when you engage in peer observation, you are not just evaluating what your colleagues do well and what maybe you shouldn't do or you wouldn't do, but also you are opening yourself up to a process where they are telling you, they are evaluating you. So I think this is a good method for evaluating what works, what is effective in the teaching environment. So that ties in nicely too. In Descriptor 2.6, it says that we should engage in successful engagement in continuing professional development in relation to teaching, learning, assessment, and where appropriate, related professional practices. I think if you do engage in peer observation and you are open to listening to other people tell you what you do well and what you could do differently and how you might go about it, then you are definitely engaging in long-term professional development, and not just regards teaching, but just having people help you be aware of the kind and amount of learning that is going on in your classroom. And of course, any of these areas can be targeted by observation. For example, it does say here that you have to develop yourself regards assessment. Somebody might point out to you, that something you're doing, a piece of assessment, does not actually fit with your learning objectives, for example. So again, I see the peer observation process as fitting in very well with developing yourself in line with the UK PSF. To sum up, I've really enjoyed doing a peer observation. I would like to do more. I don't think a lot of it goes on in my department, but I would be up for offering my services to any colleagues, and I've also put myself forward as a POP champion for Chrissy's scheme, peer observation champion, because I passionately believe after doing these observations that it is going to be invaluable to me. Thanks a lot.